A first-class ticket isn't just a seat. It's a promise. A promise of comfort, respect, and impeccable service. For 17-year-old Maya Washington, her ticket on Ascend Air Flight 715 was more than that. It was a gateway to her future, a flight to the most important audition of her life. But for senior purser Stella Caroline, the sight of a black teenager with a cello in her exclusive cabin was a problem to be solved. What followed was a quiet act of prejudice that escalated into a shocking public humiliation. Stella thought she was just putting a misplaced passenger in her place. What she didn't know was that the girl's father didn't just pay for the ticket, he owned the airline. This isn't just a story about karma. It's about the day a quiet text message from 35,000 feet grounded an entire corporate philosophy. The Ascend Air Celestial Lounge at LAX was an exercise in curated tranquility. The lighting was perpetually set to a gentle, pre-dusk glow. The air hummed with the quiet hiss of an espresso machine, and the scent of leather and expensive perfume mingled to create an olfactory signifier of success. For Maya Washington, it felt like an elaborate library where no one actually read. Men in crisp, dark suits spoke in hushed tones into their phones, their conversations laced with acronyms like IPO, ROI, and EBITDA. Women with immaculate blowouts and $1,000 handbags scrolled through tablets, their faces illuminated by the cool blue light. And then there was Maya. 17 years old, dressed in comfortable but well-made grey sweatpants and a vintage Carnegie Hall sweatshirt. She was an island of youthful anxiety in a sea of corporate calm. Her focus wasn't on a stock portfolio, but on the gleaming black carbon fiber case that sat upright on the chair beside her. Inside rested Leo, her 18th century Italian cello, an instrument that felt more like a part of her soul than a possession. In 6 hours, she and Leo would be in New York City. In 24 hours, she would be walking onto the stage at the Juilliard School for the audition that could define the rest of her life. Her father, Robert Washington, had wanted to fly with her. "You shouldn't be alone for this, sweetheart," he had said, his voice a warm, deep baritone that always made her feel safe. But a last-minute crisis at his company, a multi-billion-dollar tech firm he'd built from the ground up, had kept him in Palo Alto. "You've got this, Maya," he'd told her over FaceTime that morning. "You've been preparing for this moment since you were 6 years old. Just let the music flow through you. I've already booked your car to the hotel. The concierge at the Carlisle is expecting you. Call me the second you land." He'd booked her a first-class seat on Ascend Air, an airline his investment firm had recently acquired a controlling interest in. It was a strategic diversification, a move into tangible assets beyond the ephemeral world of software. Robert wasn't a flashy man. He still drove a 10-year-old Lexus and preferred home-cooked meals to Michelin-star restaurants. But he believed in two things without compromise: the quality of the products his name was associated with and the comfort and safety of his daughter. "Ascend Air," he'd said with a thoughtful frown. "They have a reputation for service. Let me know what you think. It's always good to have eyes on the ground." Maya felt a pang of guilt for her nerves. She was more privileged than most people could ever dream of. A first-class suite, a priceless instrument, a stay at the Carlisle. Yet her stomach was a knot of terrified butterflies. This audition wasn't about the money or the prestige in the way her father's world was. It was about legitimacy. It was the chance to prove that she was more than Robert Washington's daughter, to carve out an identity that was purely her own, written not in code, but in musical notation. A polite automated voice announced that Flight 715 to JFK was now boarding. Maya took a deep breath, slipped her noise-cancelling headphones around her neck, and carefully lifted Leo's case. The handle was cool and smooth in her palm. She walked towards the gate, her sneakers silent on the plush carpeting. A girl on the precipice of her future, blissfully unaware she was about to step into a storm. Boarding the aircraft, she was greeted by a young, smiling flight attendant named Sarah, whose name tag was pinned neatly above a small Ascend Air logo. "Welcome aboard," Sarah said warmly. "Suite 3A, right this way on your left." Maya smiled back. "Thank you." The first-class cabin was a sanctuary of beige leather and polished wood veneer. The suites were individual pods, offering privacy and a seat that reclined into a fully flat bed. Maya found 3A and slid into the plush seat, feeling a moment of relief. She carefully maneuvered Leo's case into the adjacent seat, which her father's assistant had booked under the name Mr. Cello Washington, a long-running family joke. It was the only way to ensure the instrument, too large for the overhead and too fragile for the hold, could travel safely in the cabin. She was just settling in, pulling out her sheet music for one last mental run-through of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, when a shadow fell over her. "Can I help you?" The voice was sharp, laced with an authority that bordered on accusation. Maya looked up. A woman in her late 40s stood in the aisle, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her uniform was immaculate, her lipstick a slash of crimson. Her name tag read, Stella Caroline Senior Purser. Her eyes, however, were not welcoming. They flicked from Maya's sweatshirt to her face, then to the cello case occupying the seat beside her, and her lips thinned into a line of disapproval. Stella Caroline had worked for this airline for 22 years. She'd started when it was a scrappy regional carrier and had watched it grow, merge and rebrand into the luxury brand Ascend Air. She considered herself a guardian of its prestige, a gatekeeper of the first-class cabin. In her mind, this space was reserved for a certain type of person, the CEOs, the celebrities, the quiet old money who understood the unspoken rules of decorum, and the girl in 3A did not fit the mold. She was a teenager, for one, dressed like she was heading to a college lecture, not an international flight. She was black, and while Stella would have vehemently denied any prejudice in her subconscious, a young black girl in first class registered as an anomaly, an error in the system. And then there was the giant case taking up a whole seat. Stella had seen it all. Golf clubs, art portfolios, even a harp once. But there was something about this girl's casual entitlement that rubbed her the wrong way. "This is a full flight, miss." Stella began, her tone clipped and devoid of the warmth prescribed in the Ascend Air Service manual. "That seat is reserved for a passenger." Maya looked up from her sheet music, a little startled. "Oh yes, I know. The seat was booked for my cello. My father's assistant handled it." She offered a polite, if nervous, smile. Stella's eyes narrowed. The explanation sounded absurd, the kind of excuse a chancer who had snuck into the cabin might invent. "I have the passenger manifest right here," she said, tapping the tablet in her hand. "The name on the ticket for 3B is Washington Cello. That's obviously a placeholder. We have a standby list of paying customers at the gate who would love to have that seat." I understand, but it's not a placeholder." Maya explained, her voice quiet. "It's how we book travel for my instrument. It's very fragile." "All instruments are fragile," Stella retorted, her voice rising just enough to be heard by the passenger in 2A, a distinguished-looking man who glanced over his newspaper with a flicker of interest. "We have procedures for that. It should have been checked. We can have the ground crew come and take it to the special luggage compartment in the cargo hold." Panic flared in Maya's chest. The cargo hold was pressurized, yes, but it wasn't temperature-controlled to the degree Leo required. A sudden shift in temperature or humidity could crack the centuries-old wood warp the neck and silence a voice that had sung for generations. "No, that's not possible," Maya said, her voice a little firmer now. "It can't go in the hold. That's why the seat was purchased. You can check the booking records. It's standard procedure for valuable instruments." Stella saw this not as a reasonable explanation, but as defiance. This girl was talking back to her. "I am the senior purser on this aircraft. I determine the standard procedures on my flight, and I don't have a record of any such arrangement. Now I need to see your boarding pass." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone, bringing up the digital boarding pass. She held it out for Stella to inspect. Stella barely glanced at Maya's name. Her eyes were fixed on the first class designation. It had to be a mistake, a system glitch, or maybe the girl was the daughter of some C-list celebrity or a new money athlete who didn't know how to behave. And who purchased this ticket? Stella pressed her questioning, now taking on the tone of an interrogation. "My father," Maya answered simply. "And does your father know you're occupying 2 seats on a full flight, one with a piece of luggage?" "He's the one who booked them," Maya said, her patience wearing thin. Why was this happening? She just wanted to be left alone to focus on her music, on the intricate fingering of the Bach sarabanda. The younger flight attendant, Sarah, who had greeted Maya at the door, approached cautiously. "Is everything all right, Stella?" she asked in a low voice. "I'm handling it, Sarah," Stella snapped, not taking her eyes off Maya. She turned her attention back to the girl. "Look, I have a very simple solution. We'll have your instrument stored in a forward closet. It's not ideal, but it will have to do. And you will need to show me a form of identification that matches the name on this ticket." This was the ultimate humiliation. The implication was clear: she did not look like she belonged here, and therefore her ticket must be fraudulent. Every other passenger had been welcomed with a smile and an offer of champagne. Maya was being treated like a criminal. "My driver's license is in my bag," Maya said, her cheeks burning. "But I really must insist that the cello stay in its seat. It is exceptionally valuable. My father would—" Stella cut her off. "Your father isn't here. I am in charge of this cabin. We are about to close the cabin door for departure. You have 2 choices. You can allow me to store the instrument, and you can take your seat, or you can deplane, and we can sort this out with the ground staff in New York. Which is it?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Deplane. She would miss her audition. Everything she had worked for would be gone. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she fought them back fiercely. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her cry. From the seat across the aisle, the man in 2A, a kindly-faced businessman named David Chen, lowered his paper. "Excuse me, purser," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "I fly this route twice a month. I've seen this exact situation with musicians from the LA Philharmonic before. Booking an adjacent seat for a valuable instrument is quite common. Perhaps you could just verify the booking note." Stella shot him a venomous glare. "Sir, I would appreciate it if you would allow me to do my job." She turned back to Maya, her face a mask of cold fury. "I've given you your options. We're on a schedule." Defeated, humiliated, and trapped, Maya felt a wave of despair wash over her. She couldn't risk missing this flight. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The closet. But please be careful with it." Stella gave a tight, triumphant smile. "Sarah," she commanded, "help the passenger with her luggage." She said the last word with a dismissive sneer, as if Leo were nothing more than a duffel bag full of dirty laundry. As Sarah and another flight attendant carefully lifted the cello case, Stella stood with her arms crossed, watching Maya with an expression that said, "This is my cabin, and you are here only by my permission." The forward closet was small, already packed with the crew's bags and emergency equipment. Sarah and her colleague handled the cello case with care, but Maya watched with a heart full of dread as they wedged it between a metal trolley and the hard wall of the fuselage. Every potential jolt of turbulence now felt like a direct threat to Leo's fragile, varnish-coated body. As Maya returned to her seat, the humiliation wasn't over. Stella was waiting. "Now then," Stella said, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes like chips of ice. "Let's try this again. Welcome to Ascend Air First Class. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, orange juice, water?" The offer was a mockery, a performance for the other passengers. "No, thank you," Maya said, sinking into her seat and pulling her headphones on, desperate to retreat into a world of her own. She didn't want their water, their champagne, or their feigned hospitality. She just wanted to disappear. But Stella wasn't finished. She leaned down, invading Maya's personal space, her voice a low conspiratorial hiss. "A word of advice. When you're flying in a premium cabin, it's best to draw as little attention to yourself as possible. Some people aren't used to the etiquette." The condescension was breathtaking. Maya felt a hot surge of anger, but it was quickly extinguished by a cold, weary resignation. Arguing would only make it worse. She simply stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, until Stella finally moved on to greet an elderly couple who had just boarded. The flight was 5.5 hours of exquisitely administered misery. While other passengers were addressed by name, Maya was pointedly ignored. Her glass of water remained empty, while those around her were offered constant refills. When the meal service began, Stella took the orders of everyone around Maya before finally stopping at her row. "And for you?" she asked without making eye contact. "I'll just have the pasta, please," Maya said quietly. "We're out of the pasta," Stella replied instantly, a little too quickly to be believable. "We only have the steak or the sea bass." "The sea bass, then," Maya murmured, knowing it was a lie. She had heard the man in 4A, who ordered after her request, and received the pasta. It was a petty, cruel power play, another small way to remind her that she didn't belong. David Chen in 2A watched the entire exchange with growing disapproval. He was the CEO of a successful import/export firm, and knew a thing or two about customer service and human decency. What he was witnessing was a masterclass in passive aggression and targeted harassment. He subtly took out his phone and, under the guise of answering an email, began typing a detailed note of the incident, recording times, quotes, and the purser's name. For Maya, the isolation was the worst part. She was surrounded by people, yet she had never felt more alone. She tried to read her sheet music, but the notes blurred through a film of unshed tears. She tried listening to a recording of Jacqueline Dupre playing the Elgar concerto, but the music that usually soothed her soul now felt hollow. The joy had been leached out of it, replaced by the bitter taste of humiliation. She thought of her father. He would be furious. He was a man who believed in confronting injustice head-on. He would have demanded to speak to the captain, cited FAA regulations, and had the woman removed from the flight. But Maya wasn't her father. She was a 17-year-old girl who just wanted to play her cello. Confrontation wasn't in her nature, so she endured it. She ate the dry sea bass, stared out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, and counted down the minutes until this ordeal was over. As the plane began its initial descent into New York, a new wave of anxiety washed over her. The cello, Was it safe had it shifted during the flight? The gentle bumps of the descent felt like earthquakes. When the seatbelt sign was switched off after landing, Maya was the first to stand up. She made her way to the front of the cabin, her heart pounding. Stella was standing guard by the closet, directing the flow of deplaning passengers. "Excuse me," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to get my cello." Stella held up a hand. "You will wait until the cabin is clear. First-class passengers have priority in deplaning." "I'm a first-class passenger," Maya said, her voice rising with frustration. "I need to get my instrument." "And I said you will wait," Stella repeated, her voice hard as steel. "Don't make another scene." It was the final straw. The injustice of it all, the accusation, the humiliation, the petty torments. And now this. It broke something inside her. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She opened the messaging app to her father. The message was short, stripped of all emotion, which in its own way conveyed the depth of her distress. Landed. Flight was terrible. The head flight attendant was awful to me from the moment I got on. I'll tell you about it later. I hope my cello is okay. She hit send. A single grey check mark appeared. Then two. Then they turned blue. Message delivered. Message read. At that moment, she didn't know that this simple text sent from a place of quiet desperation on the tarmac of JFK had just lit the fuse on a corporate bomb. She just wanted her cello. After a 10-minute wait that felt like an eternity, Stella finally grudgingly opened the closet and allowed Maya to retrieve Leo. Maya did a quick visual inspection. The case had a new scuff mark on its side, but otherwise seemed intact. Clutching it like a life raft, she walked down the jet bridge, leaving Stella and Flight 715 behind her, desperate to step back into the anonymity of the crowd. Robert Washington was in the middle of a quarterly review in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a skyscraper in Palo Alto. The air was thick with the jargon of his world synergies, scalability user acquisition costs. He was listening with half an ear to his CFO drone on about margin forecasts, his mind already 3 steps ahead, planning the next phase of a complex software rollout. His phone, sitting face down on the polished mahogany table, vibrated softly. He had a strict rule, no phones in major meetings, but he had set a custom vibration pattern for Maya, a gentle, insistent buzz that was different from anyone else's. He ignored the first buzz, and the second. But the third, a longer, more urgent pulse made him pause. Maya never messaged him 3 times in a row, unless it was important. He held up a hand, silencing his CFO mid-sentence. "Excuse me for one moment, gentlemen," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge that commanded immediate attention. The room fell silent. He picked up the phone. Her text message glowed on the screen. Landed. Flight was terrible. The head flight attendant was awful to me from the moment I got on. I'll tell you about it later. I hope my cello is okay. Robert read the words once, then a second time. A cold, quiet fury, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, began to build in his chest. It was a father's protective instinct sharpened to a razor's edge by years of boardroom battles. His daughter, his brilliant, sensitive, kind daughter, had been made to feel unwelcome, mistreated. The line, "I hope my cello is okay," was the most damning. For Maya to even worry about Leo meant she must have been forced to part with it, on a flight where he had paid a small fortune for its safety. The phrase, "head flight attendant," stood out. This wasn't a rookie mistake. This was a failure of leadership. a failure of the brand he had just poured nearly $1 billion into. He had bought into Ascend Air not just for its roots and assets, but for its promise of being the pinnacle of American air travel. A promise that in his daughter's case had been spectacularly broken. He stood up. "Larry," he said to his CFO, "you have the helm. Finalize these projections and send them to my office." He walked towards the door, his movements measured and deliberate. His personal assistant, a hyper-efficient young man named Ben, scurried after him. "Mr. Washington, is everything all right?" Robert didn't break his stride. "Ben, get me Mark Thompson on the phone. Now." Ben's eyes widened. Mark Thompson was the CEO of Ascend Air. A call from Robert Washington was not something to be taken lightly. "Right away, sir. What should I tell his office it's regarding?" "Tell them," Robert said, his voice dangerously low. "It's about the customer experience on Flight 715 from LAX. And Ben," he added, pausing at the door of his private office, "cancel my afternoon and clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. I'm flying to New York tonight." Ben stared, dumbfounded. Robert Washington did not change his schedule. He did not fly across the country on a whim. Something was very, very wrong. While Ben scrambled to connect the call, Robert dialed another number on his private line. It was answered on the first ring. "James," Robert said, "it's Robert Washington." James Carmichael was the head of Robert's family office, the man who managed his vast personal investments, including the controlling stake in Ascend Air's parent company. "Robert, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "James, I need you to do something for me, quietly. I want you to draft a proposal for a change in board leadership at Ascend Air. I want a list of potential replacements for the CEO, Mark Thompson. I want a full review of their customer service training protocols, their hiring practices for senior cabin crew, and any and all existing complaints filed against flight staff in the last 5 years. And I want it on my desk by the time I land in New York tomorrow morning." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Robert, my God. What happened? Is this about the stock price?" "No," Robert said, looking out his window at the sprawling Silicon Valley campus below. "This is about a flight attendant, a cello, and a broken promise. It's about the rot in the culture of a company I own, and I'm about to tear it out root and stem." He hung up. A moment later, Ben buzzed him. "Mr. Thompson's on line 1 for you, sir." Robert took a deep breath, letting the cold fury settle into icy resolve. He picked up the receiver. "Mark," he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "Robert Washington, I believe we have a problem with your airline." Maya walked through the bustling terminal at JFK, the sheer anonymity of the crowd, a comforting balm after the focused hostility of the plane. She just wanted to find her driver, get to the hotel, and call her dad. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was him. "Hey, Dad." "Maya, sweetheart, are you okay? Are you off the plane?" His voice was filled with a tense concern that was far more potent than if he had been shouting. "I'm fine. I'm okay. Just shaken up. I'm walking to baggage claim now to find the car service." "Stop," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Don't go to the car service. I'm here. I'm at the arrivals hall just past security. Gate 24. Maya froze. "You're here in New York, but your meeting..." "The meeting can wait. I'm here. Come to me." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees washed over her. Daddy was here. Everything was going to be okay. She changed direction, following the signs for the main arrivals hall. her pace quickening. As she rounded the final corner and the chaos of the meeting point came into view, a throng of families with balloons, limo drivers holding signs, weary travelers searching for a familiar face. She saw him. Her father stood tall and solid, a rock in the swirling tide of people. But he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a man in an expensive but now slightly crumpled suit. He was pale, sweating lightly despite the air conditioning, and he held a phone to his ear, his expression one of pure, unadulterated panic. Maya recognized him from the airline's in-flight magazine. It was Mark Thompson, the CEO of Ascend Air. She saw her father's eyes find her in the crowd. His stern expression softened instantly, replaced by a look of deep love and concern. He opened his arms. Maya rushed forward, dropping her backpack and leaning Leo's case against her leg as she hugged him tightly, burying her face in the familiar scent of his cashmere coat. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," he whispered, his hand stroking her hair. "No one should ever be treated like that." Over her father's shoulder, Maya could see Mark Thompson end his call. He looked at her, then at her father, his face a mixture of horror and desperation. He knew. He somehow already knew. Meanwhile, back at the gate for Flight 715, Stella Caroline was supervising the final cleanup of the first-class cabin. Feeling a deep sense of satisfaction, she had maintained order. She had put on the entitled girl in her place. She had protected the integrity of her cabin. She was exchanging pleasantries with the pilots when the airline's JFK station manager, a harried-looking man named Frank Greco, appeared at the door of the aircraft, followed by 2 uniformed Port Authority officers. "Stella Caroline?" Frank asked, his voice strained. "Yes, Frank." "What's all this?" Stella asked, gesturing to the officers. "Did someone leave a bag?" "No," Frank said, his eyes avoiding hers. "We need you to come with us. There's been a formal complaint filed regarding this flight. A very serious one. We need your statement. Immediately." Stella was stunned. A complaint. From whom the girl? A complaint about what I was doing, my job. There was a passenger who... "Now, Stella," Frank interrupted his tone, leaving no room for argument. "You need to come with us. Your crew can handle the final sign-offs. Bring your things." Confused and indignant, Stella grabbed her purse. As she walked down the jet bridge, flanked by the station manager and the officers, she felt a prickle of unease. This was not standard procedure for a simple passenger complaint. This was something else entirely. They didn't take her to the usual crew lounge. They led her down a series of sterile corridors to a small, windowless office in the airport's administrative wing. As Maya stood wrapped in her father's arms, Mark Thompson approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Washington," he began, his voice raspy, "on behalf of the entire Ascend Air family, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am. This is not who we are. It is an aberration, an unacceptable failure of—" Robert Washington held up a hand, silencing him. He didn't even look at the man. His entire focus was on his daughter. "Are you okay?" he asked her again, his voice soft. Maya nodded, wiping a stray tear from her eye. "I am now." She looked at the CEO, then back at her father, realization dawning. "Dad, what's going on?" Robert finally turned his gaze to Mark Thompson, and the temperature in the terminal seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Mr. Thompson," Robert said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of immense power. "You are going to listen to my daughter. You are going to hear in her own words exactly how your family treats its customers. And then you and I are going to have a very long, very detailed conversation about the future of the company I own." Mark Thompson's face went from Hediulhu to ashen. The airline's top shareholder wasn't some faceless hedge fund in a skyscraper on Wall Street. It was the man standing right in front of him, and the customer his employee had just humiliated wasn't just any passenger. She was the man's daughter. It was no longer an incident. It was a corporate catastrophe. The airport conference room was cold and impersonal, a place designed for contract negotiations and labor disputes. For Stella Caroline, it felt like an interrogation chamber. Frank Greco, the station manager, sat across from her, along with a woman she didn't know, a stern-faced lawyer from Ascend Air's corporate headquarters in Atlanta, who had been patched in via video conference. Stella began her account with righteous indignation, painting herself as a diligent employee upholding company policy. The passenger was young, she explained, choosing her words carefully. She seemed confused about the seating arrangement. She had a large, non-standard piece of luggage in a purchased seat, which, as you know, is a security risk if not properly verified. My priority is always the safety and comfort of all passengers. So you challenged her ticket? The lawyer on the screen asked, her voice flat. I verified her travel documents. Yes, it's procedure. And you insisted on removing her instrument from its paid-for seat. I moved it to a secure location in the forward closet in accordance with company guidelines for oversized baggage. Stella insisted, her confidence growing. She was on solid ground here. She knew the rule book inside and out. And were you polite, courteous? Did you embody the Ascend standard of service? The lawyer pressed. Absolutely, Stella said, although the passenger was, I would say, somewhat uncooperative. Frank Greco sighed and slid a tablet across the table. He pressed play. A man's voice, calm and clear, filled the room. It was David Chen, the passenger from 2A. He was recounting the entire incident to an Ascend Air customer service executive over the phone, a call he had made the moment he'd landed. He'd recorded his own conversation for his records. He detailed Stella's accusatory tone, her refusal to listen, her public dressing down of Maya the lie about the pasta dish, and her final act of spite in making Maya wait to retrieve her cello. He was meticulous, his account unassailable. As the recording played, the color drained from Stella's face. Her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. Mr. Chen is one of our top-tier platinum-level flyers, Stella, Frank said quietly. He spends over $100,000 a year with us. His complaint alone would be enough to trigger a full review of your conduct. He's exaggerating, Stella stammered. The girl was being difficult. The lawyer on the screen cut her off. Ms. Caroline, do you know who the passenger in 3A was? Her name was Washington, Stella said dismissively. I saw the boarding pass. Her name is Maya Washington, the lawyer said, her voice dropping. Her father is Robert Washington. The name didn't register with Stella. She pictured some mid-level executive, maybe a doctor or a lawyer. And Frank Greco leaned forward. Stella. Robert Washington is the founder and CEO of a company called Cygnus Systems, and last quarter, through his private equity firm, he acquired a 51% controlling interest in our parent company, Global Air Transit Holdings. He is, for all intents and purposes, our new owner. He is the airline's top shareholder. The words hung in the sterile air. Stella stared at him, her mouth slightly agape as the full catastrophic weight of his statement crashed down on her. The blood roared in her ears. She hadn't been disciplining some errant teenager. She had been harassing the daughter of the man who owned the entire airline. Her boss's boss's boss. The man who signed, in essence, everyone's paycheck. Her carefully constructed world of rules, seniority, and perceived authority dissolved into dust. She saw her 22-year career, her pension, her flight benefits, her entire identity flashing before her eyes, and then vanishing into a black hole of her own making. I didn't know, she whispered the words, tasting like ash. That's the entire point, Ms. Caroline, the lawyer on the screen said, her voice now filled with undisguised contempt. You weren't supposed to have to know. The service is supposed to be for everyone. Miles away in a far more luxurious setting. The presidential suite at the Carlyle that had been booked for Maya, another reckoning was taking place. Maya had recounted the entire story to her father and a shell-shocked Mark Thompson. She didn't cry or raise her voice. She simply told the truth, her quiet dignity a more powerful indictment than any shouting match could have been. When she finished, Robert Washington turned to the CEO. So, Mark, he began, his voice dangerously soft, this is the pinnacle of service that you sold my investment committee on, humiliating a child because she didn't fit your purse's idea of a first-class passenger. Robert. I am sick about this, Thompson said, wringing his hands. The employee in question has been suspended pending termination. We will, of course, fully refund the tickets. I'd like to offer Miss Washington a personal apology and perhaps a significant number of flight credits as a gesture of our profound regret. Robert laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. Flight credits? You think this is about money? You think I can't afford a plane ticket? He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the lights of Central Park. I didn't invest in your airline for the profit margins, Mark. They're pathetic compared to my tech holdings. I invested because I believed in the idea of a premium American brand that stood for excellence and respect. I bought into a story, and what your employee told my daughter today is that the story is a lie, that excellence and respect are only for people who look a certain way. He turned back to face the CEO. So firing her is not the solution. It's a symptom. It's the bare minimum. You have a cancer in your corporate culture, a disease of prejudice and entitlement that you as CEO have either fostered or been willfully blind to. Firing one flight attendant is like putting a Band-Aid on a tumor. Thompson was pale. What do you want me to do? Here's what is going to happen. Robert said, his voice now the clipped, decisive tone of a commander. Tomorrow morning, my office will be sending you a proposal. It will detail a complete overhaul of your customer-facing employee training, not some 2-hour sensitivity webinar. I'm talking about a new mandatory Ascend Dignity program, designed and run by one of the top DEI consulting firms in the country. Every single employee, from the baggage handlers to your senior pilots, including you, will go through it, and they will be graded. Failure will not be an option. He took a step closer. Furthermore, you are going to implement a zero-tolerance policy for passenger discrimination with clear, immediate consequences. You are going to create a new independent passenger advocacy office that reports not to your PR team, but directly to the board, and you will personally oversee its implementation. He paused, letting the weight of his demands sink in. This isn't a suggestion, Mark. This is the price of keeping your job, and the price of my continued investment in this company. My daughter's humiliation will not be a footnote in a quarterly report. It will be the catalyst that transforms your entire airline. Am I clear? Mark Thompson. The powerful, swaggering CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation looked like a schoolboy being dressed down by the headmaster. Yes, Robert, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Crystal clear. The passage of 3 months did little to dull the memory of Flight 715, but it was long enough for the consequences to take root and flourish into something tangible. something that could be measured in both ruin and redemption. The incident itself was never leaked to the mainstream press. Robert Washington had no interest in subjecting Maya to that kind of public scrutiny. Instead, his team carefully curated the story and placed it within the influential pages of aviation industry trade journals and corporate ethics publications. It was presented not as a celebrity scandal, but as a clinical, powerful case study in the catastrophic failure of customer service and the subsequent radical overhaul of corporate culture. The names were anonymized, but the details were precise enough that within the tight-knit airline community, the truth of what happened at Ascend Air became the industry's most potent cautionary tale. For Stella Caroline, the fallout was absolute. Her termination for gross misconduct was swift and final. Her union representative met with her for a perfunctory 30 minutes in a drab coffee shop near the airport, his briefcase full of printouts of witness statements. He spread them on the table with a weary sigh. "Stella, I can't fight this," he said, not meeting her eyes. "They have David Chen's recording. They have a written statement from the junior attendant, Sarah, corroborating everything. They have notes from 3 other first-class passengers. Insubordination, passenger harassment, violation of the code of conduct. They could write a book." Stella pleaded, her voice cracking. 22 years of my life, I had one bad day." This wasn't just a bad day. The rep counted his patience gone. This was a catastrophic lack of judgment. And honestly, there were flags in your file. Minor complaints about your curt tone and dismissive attitude over the years. Nothing fireable, but it creates a pattern. They have you, Stella. There's no severance, no settlement. My advice, just walk away before they decide to make it even more public. Walk away she did into a world that no longer wanted her. She applied to every legacy carrier, United Delta American. Her applications went into a digital void, never to be seen again. The industry had blacklisted her. Former colleagues who once shared gossip in the galley now avoided her calls. She was toxic, a pariah. After her savings began to dwindle alarmingly, she took the only job she could find. Her new office was a sprawling, cacophonous call center for a budget travel insurance company. The pristine silence of the first-class cabin was replaced by the constant din of 100 simultaneous conversations. Her immaculate uniform was replaced by a cheap polyester polo shirt and a flimsy headset that pinched her ear. Her authority, once absolute at 35,000 feet, was gone. Now she spent 10 hours a day listening to angry, frustrated customers yelling about denied claims for lost luggage and cancelled flights on airlines she used to look down upon. She was no longer a gatekeeper to a world of luxury. She was a faceless voice on the other end of a line, absorbing the rage of the very people she once disdained. The karma was not a sudden lightning strike. It was a slow grinding and deeply ironic dismantling of her entire identity. While Stella's world shrank, a new one was being built at Ascend Air. The Ascend Dignity program, designed by a top-tier DEI consultancy Maya herself had helped her father select, was rolled out with the full, terrified backing of CEO Mark Thompson. It was nothing like the bland click-through online modules of the past. It was an intensive 3-day in-person course, and one of its most effective new leaders was the recently promoted lead flight attendant, Sarah. In a training room overlooking the JFK tarmac, Sarah stood before a group of 20 veteran flight attendants, their faces a mixture of cynicism and curiosity. "Okay, let's role-play a scenario," she began. "A young passenger is in a first-class seat with a large musical instrument in the adjacent seat. The manifest looks unusual. You suspect they might not belong there. What do you do? An older purser with 30 years of service scoffed. I ask for their boarding pass and ID, and I inform them that instruments need to be checked or stowed. Simple. That's what happened on flight 715. Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm, capturing the attention of the entire room. I was there. I watched it happen. I watched a senior purser turn a simple verification into a public humiliation. I watched her make a 17-year-old girl feel like a criminal because of the clothes she wore and the color of her skin. And I stood by and did almost nothing because I was too intimidated to challenge my superior. She let the confession hang in the air. The cynicism in the room evaporated, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. This program, Sarah continued, her voice filled with a passion they'd never seen in her before, is not just about being nice. It's about giving us the tools and the permission to do the right thing. It's about learning to see a person, not a stereotype. It's about understanding that the ticket, not our personal judgment, is what grants someone the right to be in that seat. The training was working. It was painful, it was difficult, but it was real. For Maya, the audition at Juilliard was an out-of-body experience. As she walked onto the stage, the memory of Stella's sneering face and the cold dread she felt when the closet door closed on Leo flashed in her mind. For a second, her hands trembled, but then a different feeling took over. It was a cold, determined anger. She would not let that woman's prejudice define her. She would not let that ugly memory taint the music she loved. She settled herself, took a deep breath, and drew her bow across the strings. She poured every ounce of the past 24 hours into the performance. The opening notes of Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 were not just technically perfect. They were imbued with a profound and wounded grace. The saraband ached with a loneliness that resonated deep in the bones of the stern-faced judges. The final jig was not just lively. It was a fiery, defiant declaration of resilience and joy. She wasn't just playing the music. She was telling her story through it. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence in the vast hall, before one of the judges, a world-renowned cellist, simply said, "Welcome to Juilliard, Ms. Washington." She was not only accepted, but was also awarded a full merit scholarship, her talent and emotional depth undeniable. Months later, Maya was in her practice room, the New York City skyline her backdrop. The scuff mark on Leo's case, a faint white line against the black carbon fiber, remained. She had told the luthier to leave it. It was a scar, a reminder. Her phone buzzed with a call from her father. The Q3 report from the Passenger Advocacy Office just landed on my desk, Robert said, skipping the pleasantries, his voice brimming with satisfaction. Formal passenger complaints related to discrimination or staff rudeness are down 42%. Positive commendations, citing specific crew members by name, are up 60%. Mark Thompson is actually doing it. He's turning the ship around. Maya paused her practicing, looking at the scar on Leo's case. That's really good, Dad. It's more than good, sweetheart. It's change, he said. Mark told me 2 other major airlines have sent teams to observe the Ascend Dignity program. They want to license the curriculum. Your terrible afternoon is forcing an entire industry to look in the mirror. A complex wave of emotions washed over Maya. The anger towards Stella had faded, replaced by a distant pity. The humiliation she felt had been transmuted into something else entirely. It had become a catalyst. The true victory wasn't that one woman lost her job. It was that thousands of employees were now being taught a better way. The real justice wasn't punitive. It was restorative, rippling outwards in ways she could never have imagined. "I'm glad," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I'm really glad." After hanging up, she sat in silence for a long moment, her fingers resting lightly on her cello's strings. She thought about power, the petty, cruel power Stella had wielded, and the immense, quiet power her father had used to force a change for the better. But she was finding her own power now, a power that lived in her hands and her heart. It was a power that couldn't be conferred by a title or a stock portfolio. It was the power to take pain and ugliness and transform it into something of breathtaking beauty. She lifted her bow, closed her eyes, and began to play again. The music that filled the room was not sorrowful or angry. It was magnificent, soaring, and utterly, completely free. That's the incredible story of how a single act of prejudice on Flight 715 set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. It's a powerful reminder that our actions, especially towards those we perceive as having less power, can have monumental consequences. Maya's story wasn't just about the karma that found Stella Caroline. It was about the transformative justice that her father, Robert Washington, demanded. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted to rebuild a broken system to ensure no one else would have to endure what his daughter did. It shows that true power isn't about humiliating others, but about having the strength and integrity to uplift them. What do you think? Was this hard karma, or was it a necessary corporate correction? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice, karma, and the incredible moments that change everything. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.